Welcome everyone to the site webinar this month. I'm so excited to have Mike Shannon here, who is going to present a session on how to train your underwriters to sell in a hard market. So we'll get started in just a second. I did want to make a few announcements. On May 28th, we have Sandra Colley, who is a past president of site, and she is going to put together a program for site members, talking about how she put this LinkedIn video series together, Thriving in Quarantine. So I hope you can join us for that. And also, I put in the chat, I'll do it again, the link to the Zoom meeting at 9 Pacific. If you want to hop over after we're done here, hop over to that Zoom meeting. And it's an interactive virtual roundtable, very informal. We're just getting together just to see what people's hot issues are and see if we can help them, fellow site members helping each other. And that's what it's all about. So we hope you can join us for that. Now, if you're brand new to GoToWebinar, we want you to use the question box. And if you could type into the question box where you're joining from, that would really help me out to know that most of you know where the question box is today. And so you click the little orange arrow in the upper left. There's a little orange arrow, probably will appear on the right side of your screen, and then you'll see a question box where you'll be able to enter where you're joining from. So thank you, Andrew, Peoria, Arizona. Awesome. So continue to enter where you're joining from. We would love to know that. And if you are just joining insurancetrainers.org site, Society of Insurance Trainers, we hope that you'll visit the website to learn more about all these exciting things. We've got a mentoring program going on. We're going to be doing more online virtual events. So please do visit insurancetrainers.org for more information about site. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to make an announcement, but as I'm doing that, I'm going to change presenter to Mike so he can get his screen set up. But we're so fortunate to have Mike Shannon join site to share his talents and expertise. Mike has been teaching sales primarily to underwriters around the country since 2008. He's worked with carriers, MGAs, program administrators, along with producers of a few retail organizations. He's also one of the newest members of site and told me that he couldn't be happier to meet all of you and hopefully provide some guidance on teaching your company underwriters how to become more comfortable selling rate increases. So Mike, I will be right here supporting you. Have fun, and thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Sandy. I appreciate that. And just as Sandy mentioned, I'm one of the newest members, and I'm super bummed about the conference being canceled again. Of course, it's the right decision, but I was very anxious to look, to meet everybody in person, or as many people as I can. And we've covered this pretty much with your discussion there, Sandy, but I just wanted to mention there's going to be a couple polls, so it helps to stay alert. And we did hand out all those handouts, or send them out in advance, except for I think the actual slides themselves. So they're in the handouts, and you may want to download those. There's a couple of slides at the end that I'm not covering today, just because I've got to cover, I think it is 60 slides. So be prepared, folks. This is a fire hydrant approach for sure.
Thanks for the warning, Mike.
Yeah, I've been studying this sales training, and then in 2008 discovered that there's tens of thousands of non-sales professionals in the insurance industry who need sales training. And so that's, as Sandy mentioned, that's what I've been doing. And most of those clients were MGAs, but about 2 years ago, Star Companies found me, and I trained over 100 of their underwriters in the past 2 years and realized that carriers need the same help. And then I was talking to Paul Balbreski, which some of you, probably everybody knows if you've been around site for a while. And he said, Mike, do you know about site? I'm like, what is site? And I discovered in December that there's an organization of my peers. And I was like, I joined the next day, signed up for the conference 2 days later. And, it's just like, holy cow, I should have been part of this for a decade. But anyway, Can't go forward looking back. So I have 60 slides to cover in 45 minutes. We have a Zoom meeting coming up at noon Eastern time, so we got to get this thing done on time, and we want to allow some time for questions. So again, I'm going to fly through this, and when I sit in a webinar, I'm trying to take notes and learn and retain as much as I can. And my thinking with today is some of the technical stuff about the rates. Those are in the handouts, so I'm just going to kind of gloss over those, and then the more the real how-to stuff, which is the second half of the presentation or second 2/3. Let's just have a conversation about that if you want to know more, because trust me, it's been a decade. I'm still learning. So hard markets, premium up, capacity down. Soft market, opposite, premium down, capacity up. Looser terms, lower deductibles, fewer exclusions, whatever. So we're going to launch a poll right now just to get everybody's thoughts here on when the last hard market occurred. Just encourage you to just go ahead and take your best guess.
Yeah.
Take your best guess.
This is interesting.
Well, but see, it's an open book test. It's kind of because we gave them the answers if they opened any of the attachments mailed out yesterday.
Exactly.
But I'm okay with open book tests. It's all
okay,
about
last
attention.
chance. We only have 37% voted. Let's see if we can get everyone to click on the screen. And I'll give you a countdown. 5, 4, last chance to weigh in on the poll. 3, 2, 1. I think they were scrambling to look at the handout, so we probably could close the poll and share the results. We got to over 50%.
Yeah. So most people, the majority, thought that it was 09 to 11, and the reality is that it was actually 2004. So congrats to those of you who guessed correctly or knew the right answer. And this chart, which came from Insurance Information Institute, shows clearly, now it's not rates, it's showing percent change in net premium year over year, but it shows the very severe increases in total amount of premium written. And so in 2009, there was definitely an increase, 9 to 11, but it flattened out very quickly. So it wasn't sustainable compared to what we see right now that's been happening over the last 18 to 24 months. And I would offer, the million-dollar question, of course, is COVID-19. So when we talk about, why do hard markets occur, well, it has a ton to do with losses, and there's been some very severe losses recently. And, with low interest rates and low returns on the investment, when I first started serving this industry, I was told, we make more money on our investments than we do, on the premiums we collect. But that's, companies have struggled with that recently. And then, of course, regulations get involved. So IRMI, published this, and I just pulled it out of one of their documents. So what's been happening just in the last, couple of years and even the last few quarters, you look, operating income fell 8% over a 4-year period, underwriting losses over 3 years, P&C rates up 7% from the first quarter of last year to the third quarter, and those are the highest rate increases since 2003. So, there's a lot of, increasing claim settlements and, this other trend, increasing litigation and jury awards, et cetera. And then there's the distracted driving thing that's been driving the transportation industry rates up. And so I did a little research into that, and I've been told for the last couple of years that it's, this increase in auto fatalities is due to distracted driving, people texting and, emailing and everything while they drive. The additional miles that people are driving. So, it's a growing economy and there's more and more people out and about. And then road construction, because our infrastructure is 50, 60 years old and there's a lot of construction going on. So those three things were driving this fatality rate. It looks like it started to drop again, which is interesting, but I think that industry is still in pretty tough shape. So we have this situation now with, COVID-19. So I'm curious to know, and I'm gonna launch a poll here, what you think is gonna happen in the next year. Are rates gonna decrease? Are they going to stay flat or increase 5, 10, or more than 20%? This is just a curiosity more than anything, because nobody can predict the future, certainly. 2 months ago, you never would have guessed that we were all going to be working out of our homes and sequestered and have to wear a mask when we go out. So
Last chance to weigh in on the poll. We got 58% voted this time. So last chance, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, I think we can close it and share the results.
Sharing the results. So
Interesting.
more than half think that of the people that vote anyway, it's going to continue to increase 5 or 10%. And a couple folks said flat and decrease. So time will tell exactly what happens there. So one of the handouts that was provided was published by USI. I don't have a relationship with this company. I just found this report. And the thing to focus on here, this is their forecast. Okay, so it's from the middle of 2019 to the end of 2019. And the forecast for virtually every category of P&C insurance and everything else that they covered here is up over that 6-month period. So I combined the chart on 2 pages. There's, workers' comp is the singular exception to that. And, there's some other things that they're predicting. Maybe this will drop down a little bit as well. But the trend over that 6-month period is up. So I found Ivans. The Ivans Index just recently published, I think last week, this report on Q1 and what happened. Up 5%, 4.5%, 3%, 5%, 3%. Workers' comp decreased, but the decrease was less than the decrease in the fourth quarter of last year. So essentially, every category showed an increase over the year prior. And those of you who guessed 5 to 10% were probably, pretty accurate with what was. I guess if we had to put a number on it, that would probably be the number we would guess. So that's just, information for you to share with your underwriters or your sources of that same kind of information. But what's interesting is if you were, born from, I think it's 1981 and beyond, I've seen a couple different dates for the millennials, and I don't try not to use that term. I say just under 40, you're either a millennial or a Gen Z. And that meant that you probably didn't start in the industry before the end of the last hard market. So the reality is you've never sold in a hard market. As an underwriter working in the industry, if you're under the age of 40, chances are you've only ever known relatively soft market. So what's the impact of that? If you've never had to sell rate increases, you're just not comfortable with that. When the brokers push back and the clients push back, we immediately kind of default to our own personal comfort level with things like, money and things I'll be getting into in a little bit. So don't really, know how to explain that to brokers and much less clients. And I've been told all insurance is a commodity and, it's a price-driven industry and all that. I'm like, okay, so is that insurance for your house? Is that worth $1,500 a year or $2,000 a year? Just to pick a simple example. I don't know, honestly, what it's worth as the insured. And all I know is it's too much money. I mean, every buyer of insurance, I'm paying too much, until they have a claim. And then they find out that, well, they didn't quite have all the coverages that they needed. So, you're buying air or you're selling air, and, how much is air worth? Well, it's all about, in the eye of the beholder. So the person creating that value has to be the underwriter to the broker and the broker to the insured. And the worst part of this whole scenario is that, I've been told that 3/4 of the brokers out there, and please don't repeat that I said this, although it's recorded, I guess, so people can prove it, but 3/4 of the brokers out there really don't understand coverages. And all they know is to sell rate or price. And that's scary, frankly. It's very scary. So if your customers can't explain it, then what the heck chance do you have of having them convince it? In fact, very quickly, my nephew, who I got into the industry as just, I said, look, this is the best industry I've ever worked in 40-year career. The fundamentals are better. People have to have it. You know, it's got an annual renewal, so there's a recurring revenue stream. It is the best industry that I've ever been exposed to. But, you know, he didn't have any prospects, so I set up some meetings for him, just conversations with people. He got 3 job offers and is now working for a wholesaler out of the Chicago area. And he said, Uncle Mike, I'm having to put through 12 and 15% increases, and you know, the brokers are like, I can't handle that, and they hang up. And then 3 days later, they call back with a binder. I mean, it's amazing. And I don't know what to tell them. I'm like, well, sit in on my webinar and you'll learn. So, you know, what an underwriter needs to be able to do is explain why rates are going up. And, you know, the more factual information you can provide, the better. People just want to know the reality to it. And, you know, insurance companies can't exist to have, you know, negative loss ratios, you know, above 100, you know, because they're going to go out of business, and you don't want your insurance company out of business. So when the brokers push back, they kind of got to, you know, get their game face on and push back at the broker about the rate increase. I believe very, very strongly that I can teach you skills, but if you've got underlying conditions that get in the way of you executing those skills, you're never going to be able to do that. So truly, the balance of this presentation is getting to the why people can't execute. And 2007, I was early on in this industry. I was offered the opportunity to take a sales DNA assessment, and the company that the company I was working with at the time had just partnered with is called Objective Management Group. OMG has been around, and you know, they named it in 1990. Okay, so texting wasn't a thing, so but we affectionately call it OMG. They started out by creating from scratch a sales assessment. It's not a personality assessment. It's not an aptitude or behavioral communication style. It's strictly for sales. In fact, the questions are, we put people in a sales context as opposed to a social context, so there's no extrapolation of how they perform. And this thing has been awarded the top assessment tool 9 years in a row now, you know, in the world. And I've been using it with my clients and underwriters since 2008. And because I want to know what it is that's preventing them from executing. So the information provided in the report falls into 3 different categories. Number 1 is will to sell, and you can see these are all strengths related to, you know, the desire for success in sales, commitment for success in sales, et cetera. How motivated are you? So we're actually evaluating that based on their answers. The second area is sales competencies, and my daughter and son-in-law are kiteboarders, although that's not him. But I thought it was a good demonstration for skills. So these are, you know, your skills, and 2 of the ones that I focus on with my underwriting clients are consultative selling and qualification. And look at all the skills that somebody should have to, you know, be effective as a good qualifier. And you know, one of my expressions is, do you want to quote in hope? Are you happy with a, you know, 10% or 20% hit rate on new business? Or do you want to see that be, you know, 35, 40, 45%, which is what some of my clients have experienced. It's documented proof. So here's the list: selling value, building trust, etc. So I certainly couldn't put them all up there. But the real secret sauce to me with this assessment is the sales DNA. And they came up with this name, you know, a couple of years ago. I forget what we used to call it. Well, it was not politically correct. Weaknesses, I think, was the term for it. And you know, you don't want to talk about weaknesses. You want to talk about opportunities for development. So record collection, I think there's 45 different beliefs that we all have some of that are not supportive of our role in sales. The second area, and I'm going to elaborate on 3 of these today, that's all we have time for, is discomfort talking about money. Getting emotional. And I just have to tell this story. So I took this assessment in 2007 I read the results and I threw it in a drawer because, in fact, the next day I was driving around with the owner of the company and he said, those are interesting results, right? And I said, yeah, but they're not true, because I was confused. I didn't know if I was the old sales guy. I mean, I had 25 years sales experience and never went to a sales training class. So everything I did was just, pure gut and school of hard knocks and all that. And in 2006, I walked into my first sales training class and I walked out talking to myself. I said, Mike, you call yourself a sales professional and you never knew that. How much more don't you know about the profession of sales? So that was a major epiphany for me. And it began this lifelong quest that I'm now in for 14 years to just learn as much about it as I can. But so I threw it in a drawer and denied that it was true. And then 5 months later, I had a validation experience in which I was in a meeting with somebody that I know personally. I actually play ice hockey with this guy. He's the president of a staffing company. And I thought, I'm going to walk out of here with a big sale. I walked out of there with a totally saturated t-shirt under my, jacket and dress shirt and tie, because I was so emotionally caught up in what was going on in that meeting that I totally lost focus. And we'll talk more about that. And then, the fourth area, I've got 4 or 5 of these myself, dealing with, my desire to be liked by people. We call it need for approval. Definitely gets in the way of my effectiveness. And then the 5th area is by how I purchase things. We call it buy cycle, but in my own personal life, if I'm a price shopper and take a long time to make decisions, when I see that behavior with insureds or brokers, getting all these quotes and spreadsheeting everybody, I'm like, hey, I think you're just telling me I'm not the right solution for you. Can we talk a little bit more about that? And I'm not sure I want to spend the time submitting a quote to you. If you're an important broker to me, I'll give you an indication or whatever, but why should I bother quoting this if you're not going to buy from me? At least give me, recommend me to the insured. So that's a hard thing to do if that's not the way you behave personally. And then, of course, dealing with rejection. I mean, my wife tells me all the time, I could never do what you do. And she's a school nurse. I said, well, I could never clean up, kids' vomit and all that other stuff that you deal with. So we're even, I guess. But, in a production role, you're dealing with rejection all the time. But today's focus is really on selling rate, and why I could tell you that all of these areas are important when it comes to selling higher rates. The 3 big ones are money, getting emotional, and need for approval. This last thing, when we're looking at the summary of these assessments, we aggregate that into a number, and you can see it's red, yellow, or green. So we're able to quickly have you look at a summary for that individual person. So I'd be curious, let's see by a show of hands, who actually watched any of the video clips that I provided, because we don't have time, unfortunately, to show them. But when I'm training, I try to keep it interesting. This Jerry Maguire, Show Me the Money scene with Cuba Gooding Jr. and Tom Cruise. I mean, it's one of the funniest scenes, and you can't watch it without bebopping and that sort of thing. So I'd encourage you to take the time. Looks like we have a couple folks that saw some of the videos. So just take the time, and if you want to use them in your own training, by all means, please do so. But where does discomfort talking about money come from? Well, it gets programmed in really early in life. And I know I grew up hearing 2 or 3 or 4 of the things on this list. And if that's your programming, and supposedly 80% of what our beliefs are programmed in by age 6 or something, or whatever those numbers are. People on the call here today probably know better than I. This stuff is deep, and got a little example here of how that would happen. So Chris, 5 years old, he's at the local hardware store with his dad. He loves tools, and he's just really getting into tools. He's always borrowing his dad's tools, and there's a toolbox for sale for $49. And he goes up to his dad, hey, dad, can you get this toolbox for me? And he gets the look from his father. And when he gets outside, his father says, don't ever ask me about money in public. That's whatever. He just reads in the riot act. So boom, what has Chris learned? It's not public, it's private. So now he's 14, 15 years old, and he's doing some odd jobs, and he's making some money, and he's spending it like there's no tomorrow. He's buying, gadgets, MP3s or whatever. Here's the super gadget guy with every electronic device imaginable. This all, by the way, is now available in your phone. Everything's shown on the screen. But his parents at the dinner table say, Chris, you got to stop spending money like it's not always gonna come this easy. You got to save, and it doesn't grow on trees. So another lesson. And now he's in college, and his uncle's building a house, and he's a gopher for his uncle. He's building a house, and sitting at the dinner table after he comes home from work, he says, Mom, Dad, hey, how much is Uncle John's house? What do you think it's going to cost him? And boom, what's he hear? We don't discuss money at the table. That's other people's money, Chris. That's private. So that stuff is programmed in at a very early age, and it's really deep. So if you're uncomfortable talking about money, how effective are you going to be able to be when you have to sell rate increases? So this is a lovely photograph of a dog I hope I never meet, but I did publish a book called Hooked on Hopium. There's a couple slides in the handout at the end. It's got some of my clients and some articles that were written by me and published in Wholesale Insurance News. When I first got in the industry, I actually joined NAPSLO, AMGA, and Target Markets, and that's where I got most of my clients for the first 10 years. But when I was in high school, I actually got bit by a dog when I was 8 years old. And so I have that latent fear of dogs. Now, I love them. I've had dogs, love to get in their face and let them lick mine and all that gross stuff. But when I meet a new dog, I'm always checking to see how he behaves. And if I see hair go up, I'm like giving him a wide berth. So my high school girlfriend had a dog that did not like me, and that's me in my VW. He put me up on the roof of my car more than one time because I just wasn't going to mess with him. So everybody knows dogs can smell fear. Well, my belief is that people can smell your discomfort with money as well. And if you're uncomfortable talking about money, and it really it gets to the heart of the matter, do you believe your product is worth what you're charging? They're not, if you don't believe it, they're not going to believe it either. So what is the source of that? And I believe that, some of this DNA stuff is really going to help them manage those conditions. I call them their underlying mental conditions. So, what do you do? And so what I'm doing here in these three subjects is I'm explaining what the subject is, and then some of the things that I do to help people work through them. But this is really a function of the dynamic between the manager that oversees that underwriter and the underwriter themselves. Because, with my program, the way I teach, I do sales training, but I do leadership training, because the managers are the key component to the success of that. So here's, just have conversations about money. And in my case, that's what I started doing. I'm just more open, have conversations with family and even friends about money. And, just like it was always a taboo to have those open conversations. But by doing that, it just made it easier for me to have conversations about money. There's another thing that we can do and say, okay, if you think $1,000 is a lot of money, just kind of frame that. So, well, it's really not that much, but 10,000 is a lot. So increase your money tolerance. And if you think 10,000 is a lot, try and bump it to 100,000, because, if you look at how much money you make in a year and how many years you're going to work, 10 grand, it sounds like a lot, but it's really not much. So, just having people go through that exercise. And then the other thing is talking about value, and higher prices sell every day, all day long, and everybody pays more money than they have to for products. In my case, it was LASIK surgery. This is a great clip where Ray, the King of Queens, bought his wife LASIK surgery for her birthday. She was ecstatic. She was so excited until she had a bad outcome, and turns out he got a discount on, I think it was the second high off. It's a hysterical scene. She's trying to punch him, but she's half blind, so she misses. Just have some fun watching that. I had LASIK surgery 20 years ago, and I am the poster boy for LASIK surgery. Nothing could have improved my life better than that did. Just being able to read the clock in the morning, I was like 6:22, 6:20. What are you doing? I said, you don't understand. I can read the clock for the first time in my adult life. So pretty powerful. And then, cars and computers and restaurants, and even coffee. People make value decisions all the time. You're spending $4 for a cup of coffee, you can get it for $1.29 at McDonald's when we used to go out and buy coffee. There's same amount of caffeine, I believe, but people spend, twice, 3 times what they need to, simply because of the value that they place in that experience. And then my last example of that is talking about Tom's. And again, I'm just trying to give people real life examples so they can understand that they, in fact, make value decisions all the time, which supports the value of the products that you're selling, the coverages, et cetera. So if you know about Tom's, Blake Mycoskie came up with this concept of selling a pair of shoes and placing a pair of shoes on a young child's feet. So the way I do this is I'll ask who knows about Tom's, and there's always some people that never heard of them, so I'm out promoting them, I guess. But I said, okay, Jane, would you like to buy these women's, classics for $48? I'm like, no, I'm not wearing those. Pick on a guy and check out that Kenya striped men's cordones, right? And then I show a video from Tom's, and I think this video that I sent around, I think you're up to like 34 million pairs of shoes they put on kids' feet in third world countries, and they place them on their feet. They don't ship them off. They send people with the shoes, and they physically place them on kids' feet. And so that's really getting into an intrinsic kind of thing. And my last point of value was like, hey, I've never been to a Jimmy Choo store and probably never will, but this $48 women's classic or the $425 Jimmy Choo sandal, really? Is there $375 difference between all those? But in somebody's mind, there is. And so, value is just a crazy thing. And it's great proof that people make decisions, buying decisions emotionally, and then justify them intellectually if they can. One of the lessons, hey, when you offer a lower price for your coverages without some kind of concession or higher deductibles or something, you're really basically saying, we were trying to pull one over on you, and we were, we figured we'd be negotiating, so we held some back. Honestly, you should put your best price forward and just stand by that. And when you get in the pattern of doing that, I think it really leads to a better trusting relationship with your brokers. People say, oh, that's not reality, you don't understand. I'm like, yeah, I do understand. You just don't believe that you're worth what you're charging. So when you have a higher price, you got to focus on the value. And here's a couple of bullets. Your expertise, the risk management tools, the additional services you provide. And I do an exercise with my clients to list out all of those things, and I teach them how to present that in a 30-second elevator speech, kind of a model to get people's attention that's focused on the person, not your company. And and I said, and there's this experiential thing that is evidenced by the Tom's experience, because when I go back to the 2 people I picked on, hey, would you be willing to buy a pair of these shoes? They say, yeah, I would. And in fact, my daughter was married in a pair of Tom's. I don't know what the gown cost, but she had a pair of Tom's underneath her expensive gown, a couple of years ago. So, and you're in good hands with Allstate. To me, that's what are they promoting? That experiential importance of what they're going through. So, about 10 minutes left here to try and get done, and time for questions. So focus on the emotional piece of it. And as I told you, this was my revelation. It was the second major epiphany for me. Number 1 was, you didn't know that, you call yourself a sales professional. And number 2 is, wow, you get emotional, Mike. Your soaked t-shirt, which I'll never forget, proves how emotional you were in that last meeting. Go back and reread the report, because it said something about that. And when I put on a different pair of glasses and read that report, I'm like, oh my gosh, over 25 years at that point, a year plus of full-time in the business. And this report just totally dimed me out. And I can tell you with all sincerity, I would not be having this conversation with you today without that assessment, because I've been in a 13-year remediation program trying to overcome my weaknesses. But emotional discipline, when does it happen? These are the questions we're going to try and answer. When, why, who's it happen to, and what's the impact? So, you're caught off guard. You get a question you don't expect. People are rude. People are rude all the time. Trust me, dealing with rejection all the time. Things didn't turn out the way that you expected, or you're asked a question and you immediately start formulating in your mind, how you're going to answer it. Handling objections. That's like old school sales technique. You got to be able to handle objections. No, the people who need to handle the objections are the prospect. You just got to frame it in the form of a question and let them decide, whether that objection that they have is a bigger issue than the value that you bring. And this is an interesting one, getting emotional. It can actually happen two ways. One, things go bad, and otherwise things go well. And you walk out of there and you're thinking, hey man, we got along great and all this kind of stuff. And you just totally missed the buy signals that they were giving you, but you weren't, you were getting along so well, you just missed all that stuff. A great example of getting emotional is Chris Farley and Tommy Boy, and the link is provided to you in that list. So it's one of the funniest scenes. He had just gotten beat up by the guy across the table from him with a 2x4 across the side of the face. And he has a conversation with the waitress, and just by being himself convinces the waitress to do something special for him. So it's just a classic scene of getting emotional in a sales situation. So where do emotions come from? Well, there's four sources. Obviously drugs, alcohol, all the concussion stuff today, trauma with athletes that's been talked about for the last 5-6 years or whatever. If you're in a tight space, you have a physiological, heights or whatever it is. Those are real, genuine sources of emotions. The fourth is ourselves. And, if you're feeling emotional, you're the source of that. And, where's that coming from? Turns out our brains are the strongest muscle in our body, and it can totally control us. So this is a book that I read years ago, Larry Iverson, and stating that 3/4 of our emotions are internally generated. So as I've been researching and studying this for years now, Simon Sinek wrote a book called Start With Why, and he talks about companies in this book. But as I'm reading it, I'm like, there's a direct parallel to individuals. And so he goes on to explain how, people make, again, buying decisions emotionally, but they justify them intellectually. So the neocortex is the prefrontal cortex of our brain. That's where logic and rational thought occurs. But that the thing that happens first is our limbic system, which is comprised of the amygdala, and it's a whole, series of, parts of your brain. And I'm not a brain physiologist or whatever that term would be, but just know that our emotions are what kick in first. The fight or flight. Everybody's heard of that. That's where decision making happens. And when Sinek talks about this golden circle, the people that understand what they do and how they do, that's pretty much most everybody, but why they're doing what they do is really the key to successful companies. And to me, it's a successful person who understands that emotional reaction is something that they actually can choose to control. So who experiences this? Well, all salespeople generally, have a tendency to be more, I don't know, lively or whatever. And, you probably wouldn't typically explain or describe an underwriter as outgoing and, effervescent personality, although some companies have a lot of people like that. But, people who are, in a production mindset where they have to go out and deal with other people in the unknown, they tend to have, this emotional discipline challenge. Why? Because they're under pressure to deliver, and they get hit with something that they don't expect, or maybe they're young, and some of my favorite folks to work with are actually under the age of 40, because I love that age group because they're very, very open to learning. They want it now, of course, and they want instant gratification and all that stuff, but and as they age, they're becoming more like us too, their parents. So that's kind of fun. I've got a couple of them that I raised. So if if you're not hitting your numbers so far, then these are all things that put us under pressure, and that impacts us in the heat of the moment. And when that happens, when emotions kick in, we really just lose focus of the moment. And and our brains can only focus on one thing at a time. There's a ton of research being done about the brain right now, which I love. If you've heard of functional magnetic resonance imaging, fMRI, they can actually watch the brain work now as they run people through different situations and see the different parts of the brain lighting up. And used to be, they had to do an autopsy to figure out the brain, and it doesn't work too well when your skull's removed. But now they're really understanding a lot more about, how the brain works, although there's tons more to learn. But when we stop, when we get emotional and we stop listening, because we can only focus on one thing at a time. I know people think they can multitask, but trust me, your brain is just jumping quickly from one thing to the next. You start listening to yourself and you shut down. You're not listening to the person you're meeting with. When you get emotional, and think about this in your personal life even. So, how do you manage it? Just understand that failure, not getting the deal, is the majority of the time. That's what's going to happen. I tell people, just if you think you might get emotional, just write it down in advance, exercise it from your system. And one of the tricks is if you're feeling like your gut's telling you something's not going to happen, figure out a way to say it in a nurturing fashion. And I'll touch on that in a moment in the next section. And understand that failure, quote unquote, not getting the deal, is just, it has to be anticipated. So if you can keep, yourself unemotionally involved, because remember, people make buying decisions emotionally. Our job as a salesperson is to stay unemotionally involved, because if we do, it's two little kids in a sandbox just fighting over that toolbox, right? So you don't want that to ever happen. And so one of the best ways to do that is to do what we call role separation. And it's understanding that we're, who we are as a person, our value, our worth. This is, many times, I do a little kind of a test with people. I say, you're on the beach, you've got no responsibilities, no children, just nothing. You're on vacation, you're wherever that is, you're in your happiest place. How do you rate yourself? 8, 9, or 10 on the scale? And that's usually where people come in. I said, okay, you just got the phone call. That deal that you've been working on for, you quoted it 3 years in a row, and they said, this year you're going to get it. And, you just got the phone call, you didn't get it. They renewed, with the incumbent carrier. Where do you place yourself then? And, honest people will say 1, 2, 3, 0. And so I said, you have to create this impermeable membrane. It's my concrete barrier between you as a person and the role you have to play in production. And that takes it takes a while, honestly, for this stuff to be worked through. Like I said, it's been 13 years for me, and I think I can manage it pretty well, but I still see it happening. And the last one is need for approval. And I'm winding down here, or cranking up. My belief is that, as human beings, one of our deepest needs is to feel like our life has value to somebody else. And that's one of the concerns with COVID-19. We're losing a lot of the interaction, and Zoom meetings are great. It's so much better than just a phone call, and tons better than just an email or a text, but it's still not live human to human interaction. I just read a report about that yesterday. So out of the assessment, our desire to be liked or need for approval is manifest in a lot of different ways. And, these are some of the details that are reported on in that assessment. Difficulty asking tough questions, and, levels of assertiveness. You have good assertiveness and empathy, or bad assertiveness or empathy. And what are the symptoms when you find it hard to, or uncomfortable to ask a tough question, because you don't want to be seen as the pushy salesperson, or you're offending somebody or whatever. You think it's inappropriate to ask for referrals, and you don't want to do that, or you feel like crap after things don't go well. And there is the extreme. It's rare, but there are people who have no need for approval, zero, and they can sometimes be a little harsh or kind of hard to be around, because if you're just if you have zero empathy, and I guess you can have no need for approval and still have empathy, but for other people. But it's just fascinating how this thing swings back and forth. And one of the symptoms, when you hear what we call phony happy talk, hey, that sounds great, thanks so much, Mike. It's again a case of happy years, because what they're doing is paying you with a compliment instead of paying you with business. And so you have to learn how to recognize that and deal with that. A great clip on dealing with getting centered is this scene from the movie Anger Management, Adam Sandler and Jack Nicholson. It's wonderful. It's just hysterical. He has him sing I Feel Pretty from West Side Story, and so that he can get centered, because he's freaked out about what's happening around him and worried about what everybody else is thinking. The bottom line is replace your desire to be liked with a desire to be respected. And one of the techniques that I teach is to learn to love the word no, and the concept of giving your prospect permission to tell you no. When you give them that opportunity to tell you, you know what, we're really not going to move this business, it's so counterintuitive, but it's the most effective way to sell. In fact, I just got an email this week from somebody I trained 10 years ago, first client actually, and he said, I still use that take them to know. It's the most powerful thing I've ever learned in my career. And if they're a real prospect and you do this well, they won't let you go away, because you're basically telling them that you're closing the file. And no, don't do that. Well, why would they change carriers? You haven't told me. Well, they actually had a claim that was mishandled. Oh, now you tell me. When I'm threatening to close the file, walk away, now you tell me the truth. So what would that sound like? And you've got the handouts. Hey, would you agree that changing carriers is not likely to happen? There's no compelling reasons for them to change, or you decided to stay with the current market. It's a very, when I first heard this concept, my head exploded. I'm like, why would I tell somebody why they're not going to buy from me, give them all the reasons, when I haven't told them all the stuff why they should? And it's like, because when do you want to find out they're never going to buy? As early as possible. How to overcome this desire to be liked? Friends, family, just get your self-esteem bucket filled by them. And if you don't have people to do it, buy a dog. This is a picture of our old golden retriever. He used to sit in my office here and kept me company for years. We lost him a few years ago, but they just love you unconditionally, and that's really what we're talking about. And supervisors, love your staff unconditionally, because they know it and they feel it, especially now in COVID-19. How to overcome it? If your gut's telling you something's not going to happen, you need to figure out a way to say it. And then the concept of a precursor. Somebody say, oh, that's what you say before you curse somebody out. No, but the concept is, it's a way of softening a tough question. Hey, is it okay if I ask you a hard question? This might make you angry, but is it okay if I ask you something that might get you upset? When you ask permission to do that, it's a technique again, but it usually lowers people's defenses or jacks them up, but they're still going to let you say what you're going to say. And people will respect you when you ask tough questions. So wrapping up here, hey, I got 11 minutes. Sandy, I made it.
You're doing great.
Finishing up, selling rate, whether it's going to be just the next quarter, I think COVID's going to make it worse. The additional liabilities that the carriers are facing now, the reduced premiums now with, discounts and things that they're doing, and the lack of new business right now. But I just think it's going to do nothing but escalate rate over the next 12 to 24 months. Teach them how to do that, why rates have to go up, and then dig into this DNA thing. And a big part of that, of course, is working with the supervisors So these are some of our services. You got that in your hard copy, and I am more than happy to help in any way that I can. Have any conversation, teach you what I do, how I do it. Might be a fee with that, but that's, I just want to, I honestly, I'm not going to work for another 20 years, and I just feel like I want to share as much of this information with as many people as I can, because I know it improves careers, but it also improves personal lives. And that's a joy that surpasses all understanding. So.
That is awesome, Mike. Thank you so much. One of the things that struck me, because I know there's a lot of companies that are have set up production underwriting type structures, and I'm not sure if they're really even doing the assessments to help their underwriters understand more what the barriers are when they're working with their agents. So this has been very, very fascinating. Would you indulge me, those that are here, type into the question box, did you see a nugget, something that was like, aha, I could use this. This is really interesting. Would you give me a yes in the question box? Just open up the question box and type in yes. Did you get at least one nugget? Nancy, Roger, thank you. Anyone else get a nugget? Ian got a nugget. Michael got a nugget. You guys are amazing. And we do want to open it up to questions. And I see Anne has raised her hand, so I'm going to unmute her line, even though she might not have intended to be called on. But how are you, Anne? Hi, Anne.
I'm good.
Good. Good to hear your voice. Did you have a question for Mike, or did I just unmute your line because I just wanted to hear your voice?
I think it was the second one, but no, I think I thank Mike very much. There's some really good stuff here, and things that and some new stuff and some stuff that it's sort of aha moments, but it's like,
Yeah.
I knew that, but I forgot all about it. So
Yeah.
good information. Thank you.
Great.
Thank
Thank
you,
you
Ann.
for letting me put you on the spot, Anne. And I hope nobody else is scared to raise their hand. And I can unmute your line if you have a question for Mike, a comment. And I know he's so willing to get on the phone with you and talk about what you're working on as a trainer and an educator. That's the power of sight. And we are just so fortunate that Mike was here. So Nancy says, my nugget is underwriters should be finding out before they quote why they're quoting this account. He didn't say that, but I think finding out at the last minute it's due to a claim issue with current carrier, and the underwriter could use that information. That's a very good point. Thank you, Nancy, for sharing that. Yeah, find
Nancy,
out why are we quoting this? Yep, go ahead.
I reiterate, that is one of the most fun. In fact, next week I've been doing training classes for both sales and leaders for the past month. And if you're interested in accessing them, I've recorded them all, but the following one, the last one next Tuesday, is on qualification. And that's the point that I'm going to say, find out, first of all, you get a submission, pick up the phone, have a conversation that helps you build a relationship with people. Secondly, find out why they're going to fire the incumbent carrier. And if it's not a controlling broker, why the insured is going to fire the incumbent broker. I can't ask them why they're going to fire somebody. That doesn't sound nice. I'm like, okay, end the relationship. Whatever term is comfortable for you, that's where need for approval gets in the way. Find out what the reason is why they're going to end that relationship. If there is none, it's down to price, and they're not going to move for price typically. They're going to take your quote and give it to the incumbent, and then they're going to reduce their price. There go that integrity thing. And I call it quoting and hoping.
Yeah. This is great. I really do appreciate you weighing in. Let's see here. Can we see the tough question slide again? Is this the tough question slide that you were talking about?
Yeah, that's
Nikki's asking for that. Can we see the tough questions slide again? It's in the handout. Were you able to click on the handout in the handout section? I'll follow up with an email and put the PDF handout attachment for you, Nikki. Hope that'll help. So
I think that's the one
anyone,
she's talking about, the one that's on the screen. So.
okay, great, great. And anyone else want to raise your hand, be unmuted, ask a question, or you could just type it into the chat box. If we don't have any, we really do appreciate you spending time with us this morning. Thank you, Mike, on behalf of Site. This was awesome and amazing. You shared so much more than I imagined, and I appreciate that. And if you guys are interested in continuing the open conversation, we're doing an interactive virtual roundtable using Zoom. I put the link in the chat and you might have received a notice about that. So Mike, are you going to join us over on Zoom?
Soon as I have a 12:30 Eastern time meeting,
Okay.
but I'm going to be on Zoom for at least 20 minutes. So.
Oh my gosh. All right. Well, hope to see all of you over there. Thank you, everyone. Let me go ahead and stop the recording.